It'll be about debugging with Byebug. Yay!
So, good evening everyone. Antok na ba lahat? Ikaw na ba lahat? After kumain. Tonight I'll be talking about debugging with the Byebug. But before I start, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Marc. I'm a software developer at Logica, and those are my media accounts on GitHub. And quick raise of hands, does anyone not know Logica? Anyone? In any case, I always get this comment that we're Logica, or we're not Logica, we're a Logica. Because this one's like, multinational company.
Java yata yun.
They always get confused when I say Logica, they just miss the A. So, we're Logica, we're a Ruby on Rails shop. We have multiple clients running usually Ruby on Rails apps, and we usually sponsor talks or sponsor Ruby meetups and local Ruby conferences. So that's what I can say about the company. And then before I go into the details of my talk, here's the overview. First, let's ask ourselves why do we need a debugger, and then we go to a case study that actually happened around last week, and how I tried to use Byebug and other techniques in order to find the bug and resolve it. Also, ideally I would have made screenshots so that I wouldn't have to live code, but looks like I'll have to. so this is the first time in a long time that I'll be doing that again. So that will be, the live coding will cover the basic commands. I'll try to cover them all if possible, and then some advanced commands, and then we'll go to the alternatives to Byebug. So first, why do we need to use a debugger? First is instant feedback, as versus say if you're going to put puts everywhere and run your Rails app or Ruby app. You could just dive into the code and then be intimate with it. Also, there's this book called Debugging by David, Agans or Agans. And the debugger usually covers these two chapters. One is the debugger enables you to understand the system. You can just dive into whatever part of your app and then use your debugger to get intimate with any Ruby code. Also if you also know how to use a debugger, you will most likely know when to use each feature. So it's important to know how to use your debugger, which I admittedly have ignored for the first few years of me as a developer. I've been using before binding right and not knowing how it worked. So and then it also covers chapter 5, which is quick thinking and look. So oftentimes when we encounter a bug, the first thing that comes to our mind is usually how does it work? How does this program work? And then we'll read from up. We'll usually read it like how we read a book. Say this bug occurs on this line, and then we'll just look at whatever code that we change, and then look at it from up to down, left to right, and and try to parse the Ruby code in our minds, and that usually results into a cognitive dissonance between what the code actually does and what your mind tells you how the Ruby executes the code. So, and a good analogy for that is, you don't stop when you hear the pump. Say you're in a house, you go down to the basement and find out which pump is actually causing the trouble. So this is the book. It's debugging book. This probably out of all the debugging books I've read, this is probably the one that I found most helpful. It looks cheesy, meron pang bug, then 1-0, and then merong magnifying glass. So the book looks old and cheesy, but everything that's in there is really indispensable, like what the front cover says. But I won't cover that. So maybe if you find sometime later, you could get that book online. It's available on Amazon. So let's go to the case study. So I'm working on a particular Rails app, and I was working on the feature. And then while I was working on that feature, I also found out that there's a security issue with Rails, and so I had to also upgrade Rails along the way. And then it failed on the CI for some reason. I didn't know what to do. So before I used Byebug, and there's a quick tip. I used Git bisect in order to narrow down the problems, the potential search space. So what Git bisect does is, instead of you manually checking out each commit, it automatically checks out. You could identify a good commit and a bad commit, and it will give you the particular commit that's at fault. So here's a diagram of how it works. So say for example, so I did so I just wrote it on a tissue paper and just took a picture of it, because I didn't want to make a diagram. I didn't want to have to learn how to make a diagram app. So I just wrote it on a tissue paper, and here's a example commit. So each circle represents a commit, and each feature 1, feature 2, feature 3 up to feature 6 represents a commit. And then what Git bisect run RSpec does is, if you say that feature 6 is a fail, it has a spec that's failing, and master does not have any specs failing, it will automatically do a bisect, and then test at each iteration. It will test the middle commit, if it's failing or not. So as you can see, I eventually found out that the culprit is the one that upgrades Rails. So, and not upgrading Rails is not an option, because for me security upgrades are important. So I had to go deep into the code base. So of course I first installed Gembug on my gem file, and here is the particular failing spec. So there is, it's a controller spec. So it's basically the test as failing is testing for a 403 status as a response to a get index request. So I dropped Byebug on line 45, and then the test didn't even reach that point. So I also dropped it on line 41. It worked. So I also narrowed down the problems, potential search space further, and identified that line 42, somewhere in line 42, the bug must be there. So I'll try to cover the basic commands and also part of the sample application. So okay, so it failed. So it failed here. It says here, undefined method cache for new class. This will be important later on because I'll have to get back to that once because this is a bit scripted. I already know what will happen. So this is important. I know that this will be important later. So I haven't commented Byebug. That's why it's working. So I'll drop Byebug now at this point. So the comment matches what's happening. It's actually there. It's happening at the same line. So I uncommented Byebug and then I'll run the spec again. Okay, so right now we're dropped into a read eval break loop, and we're at line 42. And then let's see what do we have as our first command list. I'll try list. Well, it lists the lines below it, so I also know this by memory. So if I do this, I'll also. It's like where am I in binding pride? In pride. So it will just show you where you are currently in the read eval print loop. So or the wrap-up. So that's what list does basically. So you could also do a help list to see how it's used. So you can also say list lines 30 to 4 to 50, for example. So it will show you a longer, more lines of code. Next command would be where, which just shows the backtrace. So if you notice, there's a number for each frame in the backtrace. There's a number. That would also be important because you could also use that for, say, well, it'll come later. Let's try first the first command after that, which is step. So it's just try step here. So what step will do is it will go inside get and just step into the block or the method. So it will go down deeper into a deeper abstraction level. So it will go inside get. So do another step. So what step will do is going further and further into the deeper into the abstraction. So not really useful right now. So next command will be next. Next is a little bit different. It's less granular in the sense that it only executes it executes the next line within the same abstraction level. So say we're in this line right now. if I say next, it will go to line 74. Oh, what happened? Okay. So I didn't go inside, probably, or maybe had an error somewhere. So that's also, this is probably the error that we're looking for. So undefined method cache for nil class. Let's try checking the backtrace. Oops. Let's try the first line.
Ah.
I can't see it. I need to copy it though.
Resolver.
So the reason why I copied this is because
Resolver.
I first now we're at the first instance of the error within Byebug. So what I usually do is when I'm at the furthest part of the error, I copy. I would usually either bundle open that particular gem, in this case action view, and then add a binding right there. Here I won't have to do that because there's a command in Byebug called break, and then you just paste this. Oh wait, we're already past. We're already past the error though, so I have to restart. So that covers this part. So now, usually, if this is the only Byebug that I drop, what would usually happen with continue is that it will, as usual, execute everything and it'll show the failing spec again. But since I've added a breakpoint, if I press continue, it'll go back to that particular breakpoint that I recorded. So I can check that cache, this is probably nil, which is the case. And try to right now it's nil, but I need to know where to go next. Why is it nil? So if it's not nil, if it's expected to be not nil in the first place, and there's an instance variable that's nil, sometimes what I do is inspect self, whatever self is, usually check what class it is. So it's rspec rails view rendering empty template path set decorator, and what can I say about that? What can I tell? I'll check the instance methods. Original path set and find all. And then there's also this command that I forgot again, to use frame how can I use it? I can use it by, say right now I'm currently at frame 0, I can move to frame 1. So frame 1.
Oh.
So currently I see that we're in the find all anywhere method. Whereas in frame 1 and frame 0, if I check the instance methods, I don't have a find all anywhere. So that's fishy to me. What is the self for frame? What is self in frame at frame 1?
Empty.
What are its ancestors? Okay, so it looks like this class is inheriting or using action resolver, which is incidentally the one where we added the breakpoint and where the error occurs. So my first hunch was to check for RSpec Rails, and it seems that the error is not related really to Rails, but it's RSpec Rails. So to cut the long story short, what I needed to do was just upgrade RSpec Rails. Alright. So I guess that covers most of the basic commands here. Did I not cover something? Oh, display. I forgot display. I'll show it to you. Let's see. I forgot to go back to frame 0. What display does is you could write any Ruby expression. So say display cache.
Oh.
You could even display any Ruby expression, whatever. And whenever I make a step command, whether it's step next or I'm not sure about frame, but let's try next. Oh wait, next
Step.
will probably.
Nice.
So when I did next, it displayed whatever Ruby expression I added before. So every time I do a next or say step, it'll try to evaluate the same Ruby expression. So you don't have to retype. If you're looking for a particular variable, you don't have to retype it every time you want to check it. So you just say display and then Ruby expression. It'll automatically evaluate it every time you do a step. Whenever you're changing a context by moving to another file or to the next part of the program, it'll just evaluate the Ruby expression. So that's what display does. Also, you could disable it. You could disable the display. Say the second one is useless because it's always 1 plus 1 will always be 2. Presumably in this universe. So I could disable that. So first I'll just say info display to check the number to use. So disable display 2. So if I check again, it's not enabled, and when I go to the next line, it's only evaluating cache. So that's what disable does. And then for advanced, well, not really a lot. I haven't really used a lot except for these 3. Finish is it's basically using multiple nexes until the frame ends. So instead of saying, say, let's see if I can do something. Say oops. So instead of saying next to, I can just probably say finish. What?
We're deep in the stack trace now. I'll just go inside get. Maybe inside process 2. I'm trying to find a method that has more than 2 lines. Okay, here we go. So instead, I can also say next to, so that I can go to the next 2 lines. But instead of saying that, I can also say finish. So I'm back here at this exception, in different part of the, wait, the exception happens here. So I can't prove it, but it's how it works. Another thing that I've used is save and source. This is probably the reason why I'm not going back to Pry anytime soon, because say for example I wanted to add multiple breakpoints, say 20 breakpoints. What I would do in Pry before is add 20 binding price lettered all throughout my code, and just trust that whenever I git check out, everything is gone. All the binding price are gone. That's what I usually do before. So with save, you could save a file that saves all the breakpoints that you want to be added the next time you drop into Byebug. So I actually created one in advance. So not really. So I have this breakpoint here, and these are some default settings, and I also displayed cache. So I won't have to do this every time, and I don't say I have 100 other I have 10 other breakpoints, then I don't have to do that every time. I just need to save a file, and then whenever I drop into Byebug, I could just source it. And I already created the breakpoint and also displayed cache every time I go anywhere. So I could just say continue. And we're back here at this breakpoint, and you also evaluated cache. So that is Byebug. So alternatives. Currently for Ruby 2, you only have Debugger 2. Well, people would usually recommend these two because Debugger and all other previous versions of Ruby Debugger, they all use an old Ruby C API that often breaks. Every time, say there's a new patch version of Ruby, the debugger breaks. So if you check the GitHub repository for debugger, there's a lot of patch version of updates, because whenever Ruby releases a patch version, so that there's usually a lag, like a 1 or 2 week lag between Ruby releasing a patch version and the debugger catching up. So it's really messy. You could also see that people have inherited have forked the Ruby debug into multiple repositories. So Debugger 2 is also a fork of Debugger that is trying to use the tracepoint API, which has been released since Ruby 2. So that's why they recommend this, because just you'll be ensured that there's some contract involved between the debugger and the Ruby interface. So it won't break that as often as the others. Also, I also checked the trace point. Ruby, and another reason why you should use Byebug before others is because, well, Ruby 2 ended maintenance, so it's probably not even recommended to use 1.8 and 1.9 at this point. I also checked the Ruby official website, and they're encouraging people to upgrade to Ruby at least 2.2. So these aren't really alternatives anymore. So you just need to either use Debugger 2 or Byebug. Although I'm leaning on Byebug because it's the Rails official debugger. I didn't know, and I also checked the the Rails guides. It's also endorsing Byebug as the debugger of choice, default debugger of choice. So here's the question: what about Pry? Pry still has its place in the Ruby, in your Ruby workflow because it's a REPL on steroids. It's like a IRB with a lot more features. Plus, you could also add plugins, which also includes, say, Pry Now, Pry Rescue. Byebug is a debugger. It's not really. It can be compared to Pry as much because Pry is more of a REPL than a debugger, and Byebug just has basic REPL. So whenever I use Byebug, I'm always conflicted because the output is not, say, formatted properly and not colored. so there's actually someone who created Byebug, which is a plugin for Pry. The only bad thing in Byebug as of the moment is that I couldn't save something like this. Save isn't so it's like Pry but with a subset of Byebug's features. So right now there is an opportunity to submit a pull request for this gem. So that's it. Any questions?
Do you have to adjust the source file if the lines move? I mean, the code moves by line number?
You don't usually the lines move because you add the line number.
Right. I mean,
Or just
what if you introduce more code and then do you have to adjust it for the future?
Yes, I think you have to because you can only specify a line number and not say not a method. although to be fair, well, I'm adding a breakpoint to a
Rails.
gem that shouldn't be edited in the first place. So that's another thing about Pry that I didn't like before because I've been bitten before by an orphan binding Pry in one of the gems. Like like someone forgot to remove a binding Pry in one of the gems, so I had to uninstall the gem and install it again, just to make sure it's pristine. Any questions? Violent reactions.
No.
Anyone who's a fan of Pry?
Pry. Finding Pry.
If you have any questions, you could just approach me, I guess. And if you have any suggestions, like maybe, I don't know, like some debugger I haven't thought of, or... Alright? Thank you.